Hey guys, great to be with you today. We've got Robert Capovilla and Mickey Williams of Capovilla and Williams. I'm Matt Staroziak. So I always like to the pre-show commentary that we had going, and I'd like to bring some of that into the episode. I guess let me give you two choices. We can talk about Rob's brief but stellar boxing career, or we can talk about how Mickey did on the last fitness test. So
I personally don't want to talk about the boxing career since I spent most of my time getting up from being knocked down. Mickey, at the last PT test, we're Army reservists, in case anybody wanted to know. And Mickey's a sandbagger. He is, in fact, the biggest sandbagger I have ever served alongside.
So he said he was going to do the...
What does that mean, though?
You know exactly what that means. So, Matt, we're training for the PT test. The plan is to barely pass the darn thing, right? So we're out of shape attorneys now. And Mickey's like, oh, yeah, you know, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. We'll do it together. We'll barely do it.
And there's the
I don't
heavy,
remember this conversation.
Oh, please.
And there's the heavy, and there's the basic pass, and there's the heavy, right?
I take my physical fitness very seriously. And you were training too, Rob. I remember very well.
You were training. That's the thing.
And you were training, I think, harder than I was.
Well, I'm fatter. I had no choice. I was more out of shape to start. I had no choice. I had to train.
You'd call me and say, man, I just ran 5 miles, man. And I'm like, damn, dude, I just walked.
5 minutes at a 15.
Couple laps.
5 minutes at a 15-minute pace.
Didn't the boxing career, though, prep you for that? I mean, the mentality, the eye of the tiger, did it not prep you for that fitness test each and every year?
My boxing career was very short-lived. I had quick hands. I had a pretty good jaw, but I recognized that I didn't really like being punched in the face constantly. Yeah. So my boxing career lasted for about 2 years. And then when I got out of law school and I came back to Atlanta before I joined the JAG course a long time ago now, I started training again right down the street at X3 Sports. And again, I got my butt whipped quite a bit. And I decided it was probably best to focus on the law.
I can't imagine ever getting used to getting hit in the face. I mean, I don't
think that's the goal. I think the goal is to not get hit in the face.
You do get used to it. You do get used to it, though. Yeah, I mean, after a while, it just becomes part of what it is. And in amateur boxing, you've got your headset on essentially, right? So you're not really feeling the brunt of the punches like you would in MMA. And the gloves are very thick. So it's not like I was...
But what about a straight shot to the nose where your eyes kind of well up? That doesn't happen after a while, or it always happens?
No, that always happens.
Yeah.
That always happens.
Oh, man, that sounds horrible.
Yeah, that's not...
I broke my nose when I was 17 years old. My father thought it was hilarious. But, yeah. So there you go. That's my boxing career. I lost more than I won, and I never want to talk about this again, Matt. Thank you.
We could talk about this forever, obviously, and I'm sure we will at some point. But... our show topic today is actually one of the hottest topics in military justice right now, and it's some changes, I believe, that they're looking at making, changes to the law, changes specifically on how major felony cases are handled. And I've heard political commentators talk about it. Yeah. I think some high-ranking military officials have weighed in on it as well. But I'm thrilled to have you two here today because you guys are in the trenches every day. You're dealing with these issues with your clients in the courts across the country every single day. So to have you guys here to kind of give your thoughts on it, educate us on what potentially could happen, how things are done today, I think will be great. So why don't we start with, I know I need some foundation as to how things are handled today, but why don't one of you walk us through, how are these cases handled today? And then we'll get into reasonings why that is. And then of course, what the changes are and what impact you think those might make if it comes to pass.
Sure. I'll turn that, we'll let Mickey handle kind of that first question about commander's discretion and how the system is set up today.
Yeah. So really, I think this goes back to the Civil War a long time ago. Civil War was, I believe.
It was. It may even go back to George Washington, the Revolutionary War.
Anyway, so how cases are handled today is the command. And if you don't know much about the military, there's this thing called the command that makes all these decisions about what to do with their troops, like their soldiers, their Marines, their sailors. And so over time, they developed this uniform code, basically a penal code that you would have like in a state system for the military. And really, it's always up to the command about whether or not to take a case to a trial or to handle it some other way. So what happens today is a soldier, sailor, whatever, They get in trouble. The command hears about it, learns about it. They investigate it, right? Then the command makes a decision about what to do. Do we give this guy non-judicial punishment? Do we do nothing? Or do we take him to a court-martial? And that's generally how, I mean, that's just kind of a very simplified version of it. There's lots of other steps involved, but that's what happens to the general or the brigade commander, who's usually an 06 colonel, also known as a special court-martial convening authority. They make that decision a lot of times. But what I'm not including in there is all along the way are these guys called lawyers. And they're advising the command about what to do. Because the lawyers...
Highly trained JAG officers, Mickey. Get it right. Highly trained JAG officers, which you and I both were in a different life.
I think I was a year out of law school, and I was telling like a guy who'd been in the Army 30 years what he should do to his soldier.
I was a junior captain giving ethics briefs to a 2-star general when I myself had been in the Army less than a year, or maybe right about a year.
Yeah.
But JAG officers by and large are highly qualified, and that's a fact, right? I mean, these are some of the smartest folks that we come across, period. But JAG officers advise the command on what to do.
But that's a lot of power then coming downstream, right? That's a lot of authority to decide, what happens in any particular issue, right?
Absolutely.
100%. They pretty much, when you talk to even, like, let's say you talk to an E2 or an E3, a lower enlisted guy, which I was at one time, so I know how these guys felt. They believed, rightfully so, that their first sergeant or their commander, company commander,
right.
was like God. That's what I thought. I was like, oh, the CO, man.
That's right.
But in reality, it's the 06 and above. It's the 06 who has all, and the 06 is a colonel.
Or captain in the Navy.
Yeah. They're the ones with the majority of the power, and that trickles down all throughout the rest of the command.
But to your point, judge advocates at early stages, sometimes in their career, have a lot of say when it comes to advising that commander because they're the legal experts in the room. So Mickey and I have both been in rooms where you'll have the 06 commander, the 05 battalion commanders, or the equivalent in the Navy, and that 06 is looking at you to answer some pretty difficult questions so that he doesn't do anything to get on the wrong side of a regulation or the law.
What's funny about that too is the 06 probably already knows what to do or wants to do something else. And he just wants to get buy-in from legal so he can say, oh, legal said I could do this.
Sure.
Yeah. Right? You're there to cover. Yeah. I mean, you're there to protect the command in a lot of ways.
So then the ultimate decision as to what happens in a case comes from that command?
Yes. So to make a process that is not that simple, very simple, it's this. Sex assault cases per DOD policy start with the 06 commander. Okay, your first 06 in your chain of command has, for lack of a better term, jurisdiction over all sexual assault offenses. So essentially, that commander is going to get advice from the law enforcement agency investing the case, going to get advice from their JAG, who is advising on what actions are available to the commander. Then essentially that 06 commander, and we'll just keep it simple, kind of look at how the Army does it, right? That 06 commander will, like Mickey said, decide, is this an Article 15 case? Is this an administrative separation case? Is this a general court-martial felony level case? And they're making those decisions with the advice and guidance of their judge advocates, which I think, Mickey, and we'll talk about this later, is a point that's being missed by politicians today. They don't quite understand how much influence the JAGs really have in that room, and that the commanders, by and large, are not going rogue and making decisions on their own about law. Sometimes that happens, but I personally have never been in the room. I've never advised a commander and say, sir, this is a case that's got to go to a general court-martial, and that commander go, well, I think this guy is a really good soldier. We're going to go ahead and just dismiss and not do anything on the case. That's never happened. But we'll talk more about that when we kind of talk about the changes that are coming and our thoughts about what those changes mean.
All right. And so before we get into that, anything else to cover on the current state of things?
The only thing I'd cover, Mickey, is the system is designed with the premise that commanders need to have that jurisdiction, that discretion to enforce good order and discipline in their units. That the ideology, the thought process that started with the Revolutionary War and George Washington, that has its roots even before then, quite frankly, is that if a commander is going to tell a soldier, a Marine, an airman, a sailor, whatever, go take that hill and potentially take a bullet while taking that hill, they also need the authority to enforce good order and discipline. And I think the thought process is if and we'll talk about this too, but if they don't have that discretion, are they going to lose authority in the eyes of their troops? Which is something that I think is kind of a ridiculous argument, quite frankly. But it's built in the premise that military justice is not just about justice. It's about enforcing good order and discipline and making sure that our forces are ready to fight the nation's wars. And that's kind of the one side of the argument that we'll chat about.
Yeah.
You've been there, Mickey. What do you think?
Well, I just want to add one thing to that I agree with Rob. The reason why these commanders at that time wanted to punish these dudes, and they say, "Hey,
and gals,
charge that hill, right? Charge that hill."
That's right.
We're in World War II. They wanted to be fast about it, right? They wanted the speed of the punishment came quickly, and I think we're going to talk about that too, right? And that has now been lost. So it used to be a very fast process, and now it's a very long process.
Yeah.
That hits the nail on the head. I mean, the commanders were given that discretion in part because it had to be a fast process, because in wartime, you got to fight the war.
Sure.
And that's not really, now we are still in wartime, but things are very different than they were in World War II and how wars are fought. So anyway, Matt, I know you've got some questions for us.
Well, yeah. So I think we've kind of covered the way things are today and the reasoning or the philosophy that it was born out of.
Right.
But what are the changes that are being looked at now? Who's proposing them? What are they? What are the major impacts? And then obviously I'd like to get your guys' opinion on where you think it should shake out.
So I'll cover this. And we've seen a lot of movement. And I personally think major changes in the military justice system are absolutely here. They're on their way, and we're going to see those changes. And really, when we talk about positions and we talk about the debate, there's really three positions. Position number one is commanders must have jurisdiction over all offenses under the UCMJ to enforce the good order and discipline. That's the traditional position, right? Position number two, which is what we see in the House bill right now, is that commanders should have jurisdiction over most felony level offenses, but sex assault and sexual harassment are different, right? And then the third position, which is the Senate bill, and I'll cover these in a bit more detail, is no, commanders are not qualified to handle any felony level offenses, period. Now, it's not quite that clear cut. There's some finer points of the bills, but that's generally what we're talking about. So with the Senate bill, which is being sponsored by Senator Gillibrand, who has been a big name in military justice for a long time. She has been fighting on behalf of alleged victims or victims for quite some time, and has, quite frankly, a name that strikes fear in the heart of commanders across the country, right?
Gillibrand.
Gillibrand, right?
Yeah, she really does.
She's come up, she's sponsoring this bill that has bipartisan support. I think General Milley actually came out and said, we support it. And essentially what this bill is, it's the Military Justice Improvement and Increasing Prevention Act. And I think this is the bill that's going to change the way we do military justice. I think this is what's going to be implemented, and I think this is what we're going to see.
The Senate bill?
Right. And here's what the language of the bill is. Quote, would professionalize how the military prosecutes serious crimes by moving the decision-making to prosecutors from the chain of command to independent, trained professional military prosecutors, and provides for several new prevention measures such as training for commanders and increased physical measures. Will replace, the big thing here, though, is the bill will replace the GCMCA as the person with jurisdiction, as the person with discretion, and create what's called a senior independent judge advocate. Okay? And that's the judge advocate court-martial convening authority.
Yeah,
okay?
The SPCMCA or whatever.
Yeah, whatever
that's the 06, right?
Right.
The 06 equivalent.
Right. And this is going to be an 06 officer who is a judge advocate, who exists outside the chain of command for both the victim and the accused. And this is the part of the bill that, in my opinion, is utterly ridiculous, is they think they're going to be able to implement this in 180 days. And for anybody who's spent any time in the armed forces, nothing happens in 180 days, including a single court-martial, right? A general court-martial, typically from referral to referral to trial, takes longer than 100 days.
Why do you think?
Don't tell that to Fort Bragg, man.
Why do you think they would do that? Why do you think they would say 180 days? Because I think the other bill or something else that's been proposed is more like a 2-year implementation time. Why would you say 180 days? What's the logic behind that in your mind? There
is no logic behind it. It's the politicalization of the military justice system. I think it's politicians that want to say we want change and we want change now. I'm telling you, there's 0% chance we're going to see an overhaul like this in 180 days. It's going to be impossible to do, or near impossible.
Yeah.
And what if they do try to overhaul it in 180 days, what I'm afraid of is the rights of the accused are going to be utterly forgotten, and we can't have that, right? The rights of the accused go back to our founding fathers. The right to a fair defense, the right to a fair trial. The government's got to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Those things cannot be forgotten. But I want to talk about the House bill too, to kind of contradict it a little bit with the Senate bill. The House bill is called the Vanessa Guillen Act, which is something that Mickey and I have been following closely because we represent the NCO who's been accused of sexually harassing Specialist Guillen, which is a podcast for another day on what the Army has done in that case.
Sure.
But what this bill says, it's similar. They're going to create the senior JAG prosecutor who's going to have discretion and jurisdiction over just sexual assault or sexual assault related offenses. And this bill doesn't have, as far as I can tell, as much support as the Senate bill. I don't think it's going to be what replaces the current system. But essentially, it's going to create a chief prosecutor. Right. And they're going to implement that in 2 years. And what I think is going to happen is ultimately the Senate bill is going to reflect that 2-year time frame as well.
Yeah, so I think that's what they're going to marry each other.
Right.
They're going to take the good things from each one, I think, and that's what you're going to get.
The other important part of the House bill is it's going to create a new crime under the UCMJ, which is Article 120 Delta for sexual harassment, which we've seen a big push for, which I don't know what that's going to look like. Right now, they're typically prosecuted under Article 92.
To me, that's crazy. Sexual harassment is like a workplace. It's like a workplace violation. It's like a cause of action to sue your employer a lot of times. And the crazy thing about it is sexual harassment is largely subjective. So if a person feels they've been harassed, I don't even think there's really, if you look at AR 600-20, there's not even an objective standard. They look a lot at what how the person felt. Not
to go too far down the well, but we've had a lot of sexual harassment cases lately and soldiers that have been, in my opinion, falsely accused of sexual harassment. And they're typically 15-6 investigations, right? And what we've seen is the IO saying, well, the alleged victim felt harassed. And they seem to think that's enough to actually say sexual harassment took place. And what's being forgotten is the actual nature of the law.
Yeah. No, it does occur. I mean, don't get me wrong. The sexual harassment is out there, but I mean, there are some cases and we've seen them like, hey man, I don't know what's going to happen here, but something.
You kind of know what should happen.
Yeah.
So what, in a nutshell, what are these proposed bills, laws? What are they trying to accomplish? Like, what don't they like about the current system that is driving the change or driving the introduction of these changes?
So what we've seen, especially with the tragic death of Specialist Vanessa Guillen, right, is a push to make sure that, in particular, female soldiers are comfortable serving the United States military. And that's vital. I mean, female soldiers and Marines and sailors absolutely should feel comfortable serving in the United States military, right? But what I think the point of these bills, and I'll talk about the Senate bill in particular, is they do not think the military is addressing what they consider to be a sexual assault epidemic in the military. And what their hope is that by taking discretion away from the commanders and giving them to the prosecutors, that somehow that's going to fix this major problem that they see with sexual assault in the military. And I don't think anybody, certainly nobody in our firm, would say that there's not a problem with sexual assault in the military. My argument would be there's no bigger problem with sexual assault in the military than there is at colleges.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be anywhere, but I do think there's been an exaggeration on exactly how many cases there are out there and how commanders are handling the case. I can tell you with certainty, I've been in the rooms, Mickey has too, I've never come across a commander who took sexual assault lightly.
Sure.
And the reality, Mickey, and maybe you want to talk about this too, is in fact, the military is far more aggressive going forward with sexual assault cases than the civilians would ever dream of being. Yeah. We have cases right now on our docket every single day where the civilians investigated it and literally said this doesn't even meet the probable cause standard.
Yeah.
And that same soldier is then in trial at a general court martial facing serious repercussions. So I tend to think that a lot of this is politically driven. the underlying goal is a good one. Eradicate sex assault from the military.
Sure.
It has no place, but I tend to think that this is the politicalization of the military process.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think, Mickey, but those are kind of my thoughts.
I think what you're saying, and I agree with you, is that the military just has a perception issue. They're perceived as being weak on sexual assault and sexual harassment. And so and I think we touched on this a little bit already, what the politicians don't know, or maybe they do know and they're just being dishonest about it, that could be a reason, is that
politicians are not dishonest.
Yeah.
How dare
Trust your
you,
leaders.
Mickey Williams, okay? Politicians are all honest. The most honest people are politicians and lawyers. Everybody knows that.
Yes, sir. Now, what the politicians don't know, right, or maybe they do, is that the commanders aren't really in charge of this stuff as it is, because they're just doing whatever their lawyers tell them. So what they're going to discover when they change whatever bill they decide to go with, whether it's the Senate bill or the House bill, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be, they're going to get the same results.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're going to be bringing the same cases, which is good for the commanders, really, because the commanders can say, hey, same thing happened with us. Now you're seeing the problem.
Yeah.
And the reason why, I think a lot of times our success rate, Rob, and I would say CDC's generally, our success rate in trial is a lot to do with not just our trial skills, but the fact that they're bringing these horrible cases because they're trying to combat this perception issue. So they're trying to take every case that comes across the desk as we got to prosecute this thing, even though they know deep down they're going to lose.
Yeah. And that's a scary thing when you're thinking somebody's life is at stake. Their life, their career, their family, their reputation. We're going to do a whole show on that.
Right.
But I mean, the reality is that's a scary thought that cases are being brought that really shouldn't be on a charge as serious as sexual assault.
And I'm in the minority for what we do for a living. I think a lot of the civilian defense counsels that specialize in military law don't want to see this change. I actually endorse the Senate bill. I'm very concerned about some of the smaller points in there, like what does additional protection measures look like? What's going to happen in sexual harassment cases with boards? Are they going to continue to give soldiers due process or just kick them out? Those are some things that are being discussed. But generally speaking, I don't think that commanders are in a position to make decisions on complicated felony level cases. Commanders do get, typically when they hit that 05, 06 rank, they get some legal training, they understand the process, but some of these cases are very complex. I mean, and deal with legalese, right? Hearsay, relevance, confrontation clause. So I'm in support of taking at least the higher level felony cases away from the commanders, because I'm afraid for my clients that these commanders are not going forward with cases because they actually believe the soldier, the sailor, the Marine committed the offense. They're going forward with the cases because they want to get promoted to the next rank. They don't want to be the next commander on Gillibrand's radar, and they're making political decisions. We've got a case right now out of the Army where the commander, the 06 commander, stood up in front of his troop and said, I will prosecute every allegation of sexual assault. That's unlawful command influence. And that's what I'm afraid of for the individual soldier, that E5 out there who joined his country to fight because he believes in this nation and the ideals we stand for. And then he's falsely accused because he sleeps with somebody who he shouldn't sleep with. And the commander sees the evidence. The commander sees the evidence of consent. It's a bad case. The civilians threw it out and they go forward with the case because they're afraid of the political repercussions. And that's why I say, good, put it in the hands of the JAG. Let this 06 JAG handle it. And I agree with Mickey. Guess what? You're not going to see any change. Yeah. But I hope that it takes politics out of the equation.
Well, and I know we got to wrap up here, but what you're going to see, I think you're going to start seeing some accountability with these lawyers too, because now they can't hide behind the command and say, well, it's the command's decision. No, it was your decision because the commander's not going to go against what you said.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And you might start seeing, so maybe at first it's the same, and maybe you get some narrowing of what cases they bring because they start worrying about their record, right?
Right.
Just like you see with attorney generals in the state system or the federal system, if they're running for office, they run on their record.
Right.
And I think a lot of that's going to be tied to promotions if it changes to this. Like how good your record is, are you going to get that 06 prosecutorial position that they're describing in those bills? how good is your record? How good have you been as a prosecutor?
Yeah.
Right.
And you also got to be, I also think it's going to open up at least the negotiation process. I hope that it's going to make it easier to plea out cases that should plea out, because by and large, attorneys have a better understanding what the value of a case is. And right now, when we negotiate a plea deal, which does happen, I mean, look, we absolutely negotiate plea deals. You have to deal with this kind of commander who may or may not even speak to you about the case. They're this mysterious figure in a lot of ways, and the judge advocate can say, well, I support the deal, but the commander doesn't.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that by going straight...
Oh, man, that's a great point. I didn't think of that.
I mean, I'm hoping that by going straight to the prosecutor who's now got discretion, we're going to be able to look, hey, you know, the sex assault allegation isn't very strong. We're both lawyers. We know that. The fraternization charge, that's strong.
Yeah.
You know, let's work something out. And we're going to hope that that opens up the system a little bit. What I'm terrified about, and honestly what keeps me up at night, is there is so much advocacy for victims and alleged victims, and they absolutely need a voice. 100%. No, absolutely need a voice. There are absolutely people being sexually assaulted in the military today, and that's bad, and it's wrong. We cannot forget the fundamental rights of the people who serve to have a fair defense, a fair trial, and the government has to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
And one part about this bill, and then I'll kind of we'll close it out, that concerns me is it talks about additional education measures. We're already seeing dramatic amounts of alleged education to service members that is all about...
More like re-education, right? Yeah.
That is all about understanding the victim mentality, which is fine. We have no problem with that. But we have to be very careful that when those panel members are seated and it comes time for trial, they understand the burden is on the government to prove every element of every offense beyond a reasonable doubt, which means proof to an evidentiary certainty. And we have to ensure these soldiers and Marines and airmen are getting due process, because if we start to forget that, we're gonna go further and further away from who we are.
Well, and they're not hearing about that aspect, right? I mean, they get their training on what they get their training on, but it's not on due process and fairness and equal protection and that kind of stuff.
Probably one of the biggest differences between the military system and the civilian system is the lack of unanimous verdicts. So the military system, I believe it's 3/4. That's all
right.
they need.
That's 100% right.
Yeah.
So you could have one or two folks who say, hey, I don't think this guy did it, and he still gets convicted.
Yeah. That's one of the most shocking things when when you guys kind of described your practice and your cases. That was one, and we're gonna do a whole episode on that too, the differences between the civilian system and the military court system and justice systems. But that was a very, very shocking revelation that you made to me.
And when you start incorporating this education, as they call it, you're going to get to that 3/4 as a prosecutor much easier, because eventually what's going to happen is the judge, because you go through voir dire, right? And that's the jury selection. You know what it is.
Yep.
Right? You sit there,
barely.
You know what it is, Matt.
Barely.
Yeah. You sit there, you ask these guys questions. You're like, hey, man, tell me about yourself, whatever.
Can you be fair?
Yeah, can you be, And it used to be an easy kick to get somebody to say, oh, I was a SARC for whatever. And I was, I believe that victims should be given the benefit of the doubt and all this. And can you be fair and impartial? Oh, yeah. It used to be an easy kick to get those folks off the panel. But pretty soon you're going to be having everybody that way. And suddenly the fair trial, the fair impartial jury is going to be a thing of the past, because you're just going to start having this brainwashing.
Yeah, that's right.
Really permeating the jury pool.
Think about this though, Mickey, right? So 3/4, and then the new rule, I just had a special court martial out of Hanscom Air Force Base, full acquittal, justifiably so, a full acquittal. The rule's 4 panel members, which means as a defense lawyer, you don't have the burden, but you got to basically have half of the jury on your side.
50%, man.
Show me an equivalent of that in the civilian system. How much easier could we possibly make it for prosecutors?
Yeah.
And that's, I know this is a little off topic, but it kind of all does blend together. We cannot forget the rights of the person who is accused. And just like I have no problem saying there is a problem with sexual assault in the military, because one sex assault is too many, right? There's a very serious and real problem of false allegations in the military as well. It happens every day. It may not be politically correct. When we post this on wherever we post it, people are going to criticize me for saying that. Matt, it happens every day.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any doubt about that now, having seen some of your cases and learned a little bit more about the system. So, well, yeah, let's wrap this episode up, but a couple questions for you to do that. One is, what do you think happens? You think the bills pass? You think one or the other, a hybrid? What do you think,
three
Rob?
major predictions. You guys ready for this?
Yeah,
Are you ready
go.
for these predictions?
Rob's predictions.
Okay.
Let's do it.
I'm going to write them down.
Prediction number 1. Ohio State beats Michigan 56-0 this year. Prediction number 2, Matt loses his additional 40 pounds. He's looking good.
I don't think he wanted you to mention that.
No, it's important. He's looking good. They're going to be like, who is that
great,
handsome man on the podcast? Prediction 3, the Senate bill is going to pass, and they're going to reach a compromise of some sort on that 180 days, because that's absurd. And if they don't reach a compromise and they're wanting to implement this in 180 days, it's going to be a circus. But
Are you kidding me? You don't think they can do 180
see.
days? Didn't we win the Gulf War? You know what I'm saying?
Mickey, what do you think? What do you think happens with this? Same thing?
Yeah,
compromise and then something passes?
Listen, you've got support in both houses. You've got the military supporting the Joint Chief of Staff. You've got the White House supporting it. It's coming, man. It's coming.
Yeah.
And we just got to
didn't even talk
for
about the White House, right? We didn't talk about the Department of Defense Independent Review Commission on Sexual Assault in the Military, which was established by the Secretary of Defense, came out and said, yeah, we endorse a lot of these new principles that prosecutors should have discretion over at least sexual assault cases.
Yeah, you know, it doesn't really exist anymore, but you've got bipartisan support for, I think, both bills, honestly, but I think there's more support for the Senate bill.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't care. Like, I think that our job is to defend service members, and I don't think it's going to change much with that at all. We're just going to have to be, there's going to be more challenges, but I don't think it's going to have the impact that they believe it's going to have.
Yeah. How far from your ideal system, how far are we from that today, do you think?
Oh,
I mean, we could have a whole episode on what you would change if you were designing the system, but just assuming today's system versus what you, in your opinion, and Mickey, your opinion as well, obviously, how far are we from that ideal?
So Supreme Court in 2018, in a case called Ortiz versus United States, came out and sent a message to the military justice system and said, listen, the purpose of the military justice system is, big surprise, justice.
Whoa.
Right? Yeah, right, shocking. Good order and discipline is essentially a side effect to that, right? And I think the military system is far from where it needs to be. This is something we could go on and on about. Where else in any American jurisprudence do you have a system where the same office that's essentially prosecuting the person also picks the jury pool? Where else do you have an equivalent like we have in a special court martial where the defense has to have half the panel on their side to win a case, right?
It's crazy.
It doesn't. Where else in American jurisprudence does only people, quote, superior or senior to the accused actually sit on panel members, right? Could you imagine how that would work in the civilian side? You have to make more money than the person being accused to actually decide his fate. Because in the military, everybody on the panel's got to be senior to your client. Okay, so you're losing out on you're losing a voice of an entire section of soldiers and Marines who are junior. Yeah, they're peers,
right?
Yeah,
I mean, in the end.
Now, so I think we're far afield from where we need to be. What I have faith in, I have faith that the majority of military officers who make up this system are good, honest, integrity-driven people.
Yeah.
And as long as you have that, I still have faith in the system. But to me, it's a system that's far afield of where it should be and where it needs to be. And I do think that this bill is a step in the right direction. And I am in the minority for Civilian Defense Council about that. It has nothing to me to do with more victim rights. To me, it has to do with politics has absolutely no role in the military justice system.
Yeah.
And I think this is a step in the right direction
What
to
do you
help
think,
solve
Mickey?
that problem.
No, I agree. Like I said, it's like any bill. They have good intentions, and then you have the opposite thing happen. Whatever that is remains to be seen.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be what they intend. All right, let's wrap this thing up.
All right. Well, that was great. I mean, super informative, and I know those listening will appreciate it. I always do. So I guess until next time, we'll see you guys. See you at
Until
the
next
gym.
time, man.
Ooh, keep
See-
up the fire.
See you at
Boom.
the gym this afternoon. Or out running.
That's my Al Pacino.
All right.
This session is adjourned.